All right. Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about the Berkeley function calling leaderboard, or BFCL. I'm Sam Julien. If you don't know me, I'm in the Discord. I'm around. In my day job, I lead developer relations for Writer, which is an enterprise AI company. And then I also write at samjulien.com and have a newsletter and things like that. So BFCL, it is the Berkeley Function Calling Leaderboard that we've come to know and love recently. And it basically ranks models according to how well they do function calling, also known as tool calling, depending on who you are. And they evaluate on different things and post these scores, and it's great. And so the main thing is the leaderboard, but behind the leaderboard, there's also these three releases, three blog articles that they've come out with. And I'm gonna open the chat to the side here so I can see. Um, and when I was preparing for this, I didn't realize how quick all of these, like this is all super recent. The first blog article was in March, second version was in August, and third version was in September, which was a little mind-blowing to me. They've done a lot in a very short amount of time. And then I listed out the folks who are on the team. Some of them you'll notice from other projects. I think Shashir has been in a lot of different avenues. And then they also have a Discord server if you're super interested in chatting with these folks. They have an LLM, Gorilla LLM Discord. So first up, we're just going to walk through sort of the three blog articles and just kind of go over what's in each of them. The third one will have a little bit more time since it's the most recent and also the most kind of the biggest evolution as they've been doing it. So the first one that came out, like I said, in March, was really the first of its kind to make a function calling leaderboard. So it's the purpose of it is to evaluate the LLM's ability to call functions and provide a comprehensive benchmark for function calling capabilities. Oh, and I see that I need to make Vibhu co-host. So let me see if I can do that really quick. I can look at the participants and make Vibhu. Oops, person. There we go. Okay, awesome. Done and done. Okay, so D1 basically was just the starting point, but a pretty solid starting point. They had a pretty diverse data set, 2,000 question function answer pairs across multiple languages and domains. It includes simple, multiple, parallel, and parallel multiple function calling scenarios. And so the first version of the leaderboard looked like this. Not terribly different than what we see today, but there are some new things that you'll see as we evolve. The initial data set composition is really interesting because it's very code oriented. A lot of this initial set of function calling was very focused on specific like language tasks across Python and other languages. And then the main, like, I think sort of the main innovation of this first version of the leaderboard was that it introduced this like abstract syntax tree evaluation where it would look at the executable functions and evaluate them. And they have this nice flow chart in here. It's pretty interesting how they created this, where it will evaluate the functions and the parameters and see if it matches what was expected, and then kind of run it through these different scenarios. And they go into more detail in the actual blog article of how they actually parse through the functions with abstract syntax tree navigation and match the parameters and that kind of thing. So if you want to dig deeper into that, you can go through there. So that was sort of the first version. Like I said, it was only 6 or 7 or 8 months ago, so not that long ago. And then with the second version, they were really focused on improving the data set. So they came out with this second version titled Live Dataset, and they were really focused on getting more real world scenarios, like with live user contributed data, having more rare use cases, like having lots and complex nested parameters, and then fixing some of the issues from the first version, just figuring out some areas of like data contamination and bias and things like that. So they spent a lot of time, like most of the second article is just about all of the different issues that they've worked on with the data pre-processing, filtering, quality improvement, that kind of thing. And I'll share these slides in the Discord as well, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. And they ended up with a data set of 2,251 question function answer pairs so that they could address some of these issues. So they did a lot of like deduplication using Rouge scores. They did a bunch of filtering and just like standardized the function documents to better fit their format and enhance their user prompting. So then,
洗澡。
你现在洗澡好，我们先去
I think somebody needs to mute. So then if you look at the way they display the data set composition in the second version, you can see that it's a lot less focused on specific coding languages and things like that, and more about what they were trying to accomplish with it. So like relevance detection, irrelevance detection, and maintaining some of these things with the abstract syntax tree and parallel multiple function calling and things like that. So a lot of the sort of like underlying methodology of how they did the benchmarking didn't really change in the second version so much as the data process. So in that second version, they have this nice, another nice visual. I really like how many visuals they include in these blog articles. So they have this one for how they actually did the kind of the flow for all of the live data that they were getting. So they took the user queries and did this data pre-processing with them, and then did some filtering and some standardization and things like that to end up with this data set. So that's the second version. And then the third version was a pretty big leap forward. Oops. To go into multi-turn and multi-step function calling. So previously, it was single turn or some parallel function calling, but this is really digging into multi-turn and multi-step function calling, which I'll show a diagram of in a second. But really to get to where we're testing for like agentic mimicking agentic behaviors, where we're kind of all trying to get to by using function calling. So one of the sort of like main innovations of this that we'll talk about in a second is the what they called state-based evaluation. So they really updated their evaluation from the abstract syntax tree to something called state-based evaluation, which we'll talk about in just a second. So they define the terms in the third version of single turn, multi-step, and multi-turn. And that's basically the difference in being able to say something like just, find me flights from New York to Tokyo tomorrow versus like, I want to plan a flight, or I want to find multiple flights, or multi-turn being sort of like maintaining a context and asking follow-up questions. And that's where like having to evaluate state comes into play, because the model is going to have to remember that it's got these different responses kind of rolling of like, I want to book this one. Okay, book me the 10 a.m. version. Okay, like what's the confirmation ID, that kind of thing. So really interesting how they set this up. So the data set composition, they also made some pretty interesting improvements on how they did the data composition. They started categorizing them according to like multi-turn and augmented. I see a question in the chat, go full screen or slideshow. I was leaving it like this so that we could bounce back and forth to the actual blog articles, but for now I could do, oh, actually, then I'd have to stop sharing and resharing. So I'm going to leave this for now, unless it's like really, really hard for people to see. I can also hide the navigation and zoom in a little bit, probably. Okay. Oh, that's going to be too much. Let's go back to fit. I'll also share these slides. Let's see if I can just, let me just dump the link in here as well, so that if you want to look at it close up, you can. Okay, so so they had to change their approach to actually curating the data, which was really interesting because they wanted to be able to capture the multi-turn and the long context multi-turn and that kind of thing. And so they did this really interesting approach where they basically created their own API for the sake of this testing, and then did this like mapping to create a graph edge construction and like generate tasks through that. And so I'll just show really quick. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but what was cool is they built out this like whole API code base where they had like vehicle control and stock trading and travel booking, and then like a file system, and then also like a couple of different like cross-functional APIs, like for messaging and simulating Twitter and creating tickets and doing math and that kind of thing. And kind of like built out this system where they would build out these APIs and generate a graph from it, and then use that to derive a bunch of example queries and function lists and that kind of thing, and then generate this data set that way, which I thought was like pretty ingenious. So you can now see the third version, the data set composition looks really, really different than it did in the first couple. And that's because they're really honing in on like what they're trying to test for there. And so, and they actually go into in the article, they go deeper into like what all of these mean and what they do. But you can see that they're doing things like having a specific set of questions for testing for long context and or testing for missing params, that kind of thing. And so yeah, like I said, they turn that into this nice system with an API that they created that they could use to evaluate. And then they have this interesting validation process where they check for the questions, and they use this human ground truth as a way to check for these things. And they go into a little bit more on that validation side. Yeah, so they actually like have humans label like what would be the correct answer for these different scenarios, and that way they could check to see how close the model gets to aligning with the human response. And so then that gets us into state-based evaluation. And so they use this as the primary metric to assess the performance of the models. And this is really interesting because the way they basically compare the final state after all the function calls are executed to see whether the system's internal changes after each step like align with what you're expecting, which is better for reflecting real world performance. Because like in multi-turn interactions, you're trying to update a system state, like whether it's like with a vehicle or a file system or something like that. Like you want to be able to check to see whether you've successfully deleted a file or something like that. It's not as straightforward as just like answer a math problem or call an API or something like that. So they compare the attributes of the system state after every turn against the expected state. So for example, if you had a series of function calls of asking the LLM to like create a file, write data to the file, and close it, it would basically check after each turn whether the file exists, whether the correct data was written, whether the file was properly closed. And if they're present and correct, then the evaluation succeeds. And so then they also have a section at the end on the results and error analysis. I thought this was like a super interesting section of what the models struggled with, and they gave a few examples. So the first one was failure to perform implicit actions. So they had this example here of like asking the model to like fill a fuel tank. And so the model thought that the tank was already full or nearly full and didn't like understand that they didn't actually need to do the filling. Um, so that was really interesting. And then the second one they gave was failure to understand the current state before performing the action. So if, for example, you're already in the present working directory is already Alex, and you tell it to go into the directory named Alex, it didn't know that it could just like check to see whether you were already in the present working directory named Alex. It would just create it anyway. Um, so pretty interesting. And then the last example that they give is LLMs incur unnecessary planning and thinking, which I thought was like a really funny way of putting that. Um, but so they give the example of like you're already authenticated in the Twitter API and you ask the model to do something with Twitter, and it like goes ahead and tries to authenticate you again. It didn't know that you were already authenticated with Twitter. And so it's sort of like unnecessarily added a step. And so it's interesting because all three of these sort of tie into like knowing the current state or like current context that the question is asked in. And that turns out to be like more challenging than you would think for these models. Um, and so that's all I had like for the actual overview. And then I figured if anybody wanted to just like chime in and talk about any of these things, we could. They also posted the data set on Hugging Face, which is pretty interesting. It doesn't quite work. There's some sort of error where you can't like see all of it, but you can see some of it. A lot of them are the math problems, but there's also like some travel questions and other like planning questions and things like that, which are kind of just like interesting inspiration for function calling in general. But yeah, that's all I had for the actual like overview of everything.
Since nobody's jumping here, I found what you mentioned about using the syntax tree to generate sort of like I think I don't know if I understood this correctly, but um, uh, generating sort of test cases that are like a sequence of API calls basically, and then from that generating like a scenario that sort of like implements that so that you can check that it has an absolute correct answer, and then like a scenario that you can have the LLM, the function calling LLM follow through. Did I understand that correctly?
I think so. Yeah, caveat that I'm still wrapping my head around it too, but yeah, I think that's basically what they did, where um they kind of had these different categories and that they wanted to accomplish, and then they used like the source code and everything to create the graph and like generate the tasks to do it. But
I
then I
see.
think
So what
they
how did you grok how they graph, how they did the graph edge construction?
Yeah, let's see. We'll talk about that a little bit more down here. Yeah. Yeah, so there's this section here where they talk about each function represents a node, and then they manually map out direct edges, meaning a function's output is an input of the downstream function. So I guess they've got this example here of placing order, like getting the available stock. It is necessary in order to place the order for the stock. Whenever we
Yeah,
need a data set, we sample a node on the graph and randomly traverse the graph to generate an execution path.
I
Through
see.
the
Okay.
execution path, we're able to extrapolate. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So they basically go something like, okay, manually create the graph for the API and then sample a node in the graph and then traverse the graph according to the edges. And then from that, then generate. So you have function calls, a list of function calls and probably parameters, and then generate a scenario based on that sort of matches with that. Is that kind of what I?
Yeah, I think so. And I forgot to mention this part, which is really interesting. They use this like data set from Persona Hub to like take a few examples of different personas and then like generate the different queries based on those personas, basically.
So like stock trading by an elderly hermit, for example.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
Okay.
but then I think after like once they had that, oh yeah, so they've got a triplet of question, function list, and initial config, and then
Yeah.
they had humans actually like
Okay.
look
Yeah.
at it and verify everything and like validate that these are like good questions that actually make
Right.
sense.
Okay. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I agree. That is a pretty cool way to generate a data set like this, where you kind of get a good covering set, but and sort of like generate the language around it, but then yeah, and then I guess it's small enough that you can label the whole thing, or did they label the whole thing?
I think so because there were only like 2,200
Okay,
questions.
yeah, so you can probably accomplish
So it seemed like they labeled everything.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they did a series of like validations for each one. Oh, and also built tests around unit tests and error handling tests and things like that.
All right.
Um,
Got it. Yeah,
yeah.
because I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the whole idea here, if I understand correctly, is that I can, because I'm tracking my state, I can know that the series of function calls that it made I ended up in the correct state because of them, or I didn't. And that, so you get like
Yeah.
a hard yes, no on that.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what they were designing around because of the state-based evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. There was also a whole section I didn't really dive into of like how they go through like a lengthy discussion on like response-based evaluation and why they don't use like the React technique and things like that that I didn't really dig into, but other things that are just interesting around like the limitations for evaluating with multi-turn scenarios.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's all I got. These aren't like super long, and so it's not like a crazy amount of stuff to read through, but it's definitely really interesting and then helps you kind of understand things a little bit better. The only thing I didn't see a lot of information on was how they derived this hallucination measurement. I don't know if anybody else read through it and caught that, but that was the only thing that I didn't see like a lot of information on how they did the hallucination measurement.
I believe, and I could this is just not from the paper, but just like a thing that I think it would be is because they have a data set or something of a data set called like API Zoo, where basically it's sort of the open source repository of like the correct documentation of all the API or of a large amount of APIs. So presumably that could be like a ground truth to benchmark against, and then like how far you are, I don't know, probably semantically or something from that, or state-based wise, I don't know.
Oh,
Be my
interesting.
guess.
That's interesting. I don't suppose anybody tried to run this locally, did they? Because they link out to the code. You can actually like run it locally. I did not try to do it, but um, just so people know, you actually can. You can just clone this and try it yourself. Although you need like 1,000 API keys, like any other any other leaderboard thing. But yeah.
I've not tried the
Cool.
leaderboard specifically, but there are a few things in that repo that are quite useful. Open
Oh, really?
functions, Gorilla CLI, et cetera. Check them out.
Oh, cool.
Worth looking into.
Sam, is there any description on how they provide the state of the model? Like what API queries it has already executed or what the original request is? How do they go about that?
Yeah, I think there was in this section. I mean, they don't go into a ton of detail, but basically, let's see. So yeah, it says as the model interacts with the API, the backend tracks how the state evolves. Each function call alters the state, such as creating files. At every turn, we compare the instance's current state from executing the model function calls with the expected ground truth. So they don't go into like any technical detail. I bet it's in the code somewhere. But it sounds like it's done in the API itself. I'd be curious to know more detail about like how that actually happens and how they read it out.
It seems like that would need to be specific to the API, right? Because each API is going to have its own set of state variables that it needs to track, right? Like a file system is different than a Twitter post or whatever. So it seems like their mock APIs probably implement some sort of state. That's my guess.
That might be a good. I think Swick said they're going to have somebody from BFCL on the podcast soon. That would probably be a good question for them. I'd be super curious about that.
So do they have like an API that orchestrates the request to other APIs, or is this just like referring to any API that you hit?
I think it's, yeah, they must have had sort of one collective API that was a collection of the like 3 or 4, or no, it was like 4 single things and like 4 cross-functional APIs. So they must have had something that was orchestrating those different.
I mean, if you're not familiar with Gorilla itself, that's what it does. It's a model that specifically generates API calls and nothing else.
Wait, but we're talking about a model, and then we're talking about like an API that orchestrates requests to towards other APIs. So you can make an API call that calls this model, but that's where I'm like confused. I thought it was a model, that model calling API calls that it was trained on. Like I showed up to this meeting late, so you might not know this, but I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. Can't picture this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how they did that. If they had each API just separate and isolated, so that the model would just call them call for that API directly, or if they probably, I mean, that would be my guess, is that they kept them separate, because then they would know whether the model was actually calling the right API and not just like a gateway. I don't know. That's a good question.
So yikes, you're having somebody from the Gorilla team come speak?
I think that is I think that was, I saw Swix mentioning something about that.
I think he's gonna have somebody come on the podcast. Was that what I think he said? I don't remember who.
Yeah, there's something in Discord about it. I am not organizing anything at the moment, but you know, if you have questions, they tend to be like super responsive in Discord. So just go jump in the Gorilla LLM and pick some brains.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty active server.
It would be so much fun if he hosted the podcasts with us as an audience. I would love that.
I could dig it. That could be fun.
I would have loved to have spoken to like the person behind structure generation at OpenAI, and then a lot of other people.
Maybe just like at least like a questions to ask drop-off box is worth doing. Thinking about it or something.
Yeah, or something we could do is like we could do like an AI in action where we actually like, you know, deploy this. I don't know, Sam, would you be like open to doing that?
I'm not in charge here. I don't know. I'm just doing.
When you say deploy this, what do you mean? Like deploy this?
No, not deploy. Just get it running. Just to like clear up any doubts.
Like the leaderboard, you mean itself?
Gorilla. I'm talking about this system that they're describing here.
Oh.
Well, okay, so yeah, so that's the leaderboard, I think. I mean, yeah, like if that's something that you are interested in trying to make happen, I presume that we would have an open slot on AI in action at some point, and that like sounds interesting. Just like try to get the thing working.
I'm not committing to anything.
Not
But
committing.
I just said like.
I mean, that's fair. That is an interesting idea of like we could do an AI in action rather than of a like let's try and get the thing working as opposed to like here is how the working thing that I use works.
No,
Would be interesting. Or
Like I already have it working. No, trying to get it working in a span of like 1 hour is not feasible for me at least.
yeah, I mean, cool idea, I think. We can post
I'm
about
just
it in
throwing it out
AI
there.
in
If somebody
action.
wants
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do that, I'm gonna be on there.
for sure.
I'm gonna be an
Give it a
audience
shot.
spectator. Yeah, I've had Gorilla come up very often, partially from Yikes and other people,
I'm a
and I've
huge
never actually done
huge
it.
Gorilla shill and kind of a Shashir fan, but that's the Gorilla CLI is really helpful because I was using GitHub CLI or the GitHub Copilot CLI for quite some time, but Gorilla CLI is like open and I don't have to worry about GitHub connections. I can just like grab it and it does the same thing basically. So
What does the Gorilla CLI do? I'm not familiar.
it's you put in a natural language query of the CLI command that you want to run, and it'll give you the CLI command to do it. It's like if you used Copilot CLI, it's the same thing basically.
I see. Okay. I haven't used that. That's a cool idea. I mean, I've wanted to implement that myself, but it sounds like, Gorilla already has they already tied up their model with the little front end. That's cool.
Yeah, no, there's the other interesting thing, I guess, to go over the cool stuff in the repo. There's a thing called Gorilla Open Functions, where you can sort of more or less like staple a Gorilla to whatever model that you're playing with. So if it doesn't have function calling, you can just implement open functions and it'll give it function calling basically.
I see.
Oh, cool.
And then you end up with no files in your file system.
Yeah, just removes
Well,
everything.
it does hallucinate from time to time. So
Yeah, we didn't actually. I almost wonder if that'd be another either AI in action or paperclip of just like the Gorilla stuff in general. Like we didn't. There's a paper for Gorilla and everything, but
yeah.
like it was going to be too much to try to cram into this. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I do feel like I would like to see a demo of those like that the CLI total CLI toolchain. Like I know that I've seen a bunch of like sort of these things in use, but I haven't gotten started with them myself, and I've wanted to and never had the time to get started and know what's actually useful. So yeah, that would be a cool AI in action.
That would. Cool. Anything else? Anybody other discussion topics?
So I actually I've had an idea in my head for a while, and I wanted to share it with people if there's no other, it's relevant to this topic. I wanted to share it with people in case if there's no other topics. So, but the idea is basically to build a leaderboard of the quality of predictions of an LLM or LLMs using like and allow like so the idea would be to have questions that are like that are around some future event, like who will be elected president, right? And you have a list of them, and then you ask LLMs to predict based on some sort of canonical data that you also bring in for the LLM to use, plus any other data that it wants to. Like if it's an agent system, then it can go and search the web and do whatever it wants, and brings in like whatever context it wants, and then makes a prediction on a given day about that event. And then a series of questions like sort of evolves every day, and you basically the LLM's placing bets basically on that. And then over time, you track the quality of prediction of those LLMs or agent systems. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because judging an AI or a person's prediction quality is actually one of the only ways that you can actually assess like quality of information on the internet, right? So if you have a person or an AI that can accurately predict the future, then that and do it better and sort of in like sort of stacked rank, right? Because I can always I can very accurately predict that the sun will come up tomorrow. So it's not it has to be a relative ranking. And if you have an AI or a person that can predict better than sort of than the crowd, then that person likely has a good model of the world, right? And that good model of the world represents, sort of like at least um, somebody who you probably want to listen to more than the crowd, right? So I feel like this would be a really cool start to developing a way to judge both people. Like you could imagine now look like crawling the news sites and look at people who are making predictions and then sort of give everybody like track scores for different people and their predictions in addition to LLM. So I feel like this would be a really cool way to get a project started. I wonder if people have thoughts about this and if anyone would be interested in working together on it. Deafening silence.
I was busy trying to get my Gorilla CLI working, but so I was distracted. What is the thing that you want help on that you were doing? Like
Well, okay, summary leaderboard of the quality of predictions that AIs and agents and people make. So like with you can start with news items or whatever, like certain current events, and then you predict, and that becomes a bet kind of sort of, and I can explain the betting mechanism that is fair. And then
like just a general prediction market?
Well, it is like a prediction market, but it probably looks a little different because I don't think it's particularly useful to have it like maintaining an account and the ability, like that's a separate ability that I think is not necessary to track. But something like a prediction market, but for us, a set of things that, you sort of like a limited set of things that you track over time, and whichever LLM and or person does the best kind of filters to the top.
That sounds interesting and probably related to things that I'm interested in. So if you like, I don't know, if you start cranking on it or throw up a repo and shoot me a link or whatever, I'll probably take a look and play around with it.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar, and I don't know if they have like an SDK or something, so you can rig up your own, but you can check out Polymarket. It's like one of the biggest.
Yeah.
Ones.
So I mean, I don't want to place real bets, and I'm not sure that maybe I'm sure there are like.
I'm thinking like just throw up a Polymarket instance on like testnet or something and just use Monopoly money or whatever.
Yeah, Monopoly. Okay. So Polymarket. Well, okay. Maybe I'm not familiar. I thought I was familiar with Polymarket, but maybe I'm thinking of a different one. Is that the one that Nate Silver is?
Start Discord thread about this.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Take it there and see who else is interested.
Yeah.
Back on Paper Club. Do we have any last questions for Sam on Gorilla? I think some stuff popped up in the chat, but it looks like you kind of answered it in chat too. Basically that, and then for next week's paper, if anyone wants to volunteer. Okay, have you guys seen Momo? It's the open weight, open data, multimodal state-of-the-art model. So it's from the I-21, I think. I don't know how good the paper is, but the model is pretty good. It's a pretty decent technical report. I'm hoping the paper is good because I'm down to cover it. They do go a lot into data, how they get the data. I think they pre-train it from Clip, but it's a pretty good recent multimodal foundation model. I can cover that unless someone else wants to volunteer.
That sounds super interesting, yeah. I was gonna say I can be a backup if I pick a Monte Carlo paper and and everything works out. But I would actually be pretty interested to get a download on Momo too, so.
Okay, I'll do Momo next week. Here's a link. I'll throw it in Paper Club. But thanks for sharing, Sam. It's
Real
always
quick,
fun.
I did want to check in. Is there anybody that's like new to Paper Club that has not presented or is like kind of maybe on board with it, maybe not? If so, freaking raise your hand, I guess, and you know, if you need like a little bit of help or support or whatever, trying to like get something, because trying to facilitate new people that haven't done it before, because I know you and I have done it a bunch of times. But yeah, feel free to like ping me in Discord or whatever if you have questions or something, or if you want to do it. Feel free to, yeah, let one of us know and we would happily hand over the reins.
Yeah, I'll make an announcement that this is the paper. If anyone else wants to sub in, we can always take it. But yeah. Cool. Thanks, Sam, for covering. Any last thoughts on this? I know some questions have popped up you're answering.
No, yeah, this has been great. Thanks for everybody for listening and joining.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.